thank you so very much for coming. It's so nice to see all of you and lots of new faces here. This is the Masters of Game Design program that we have been doing now for the past about 6 or 7 months now here at NYFA. We want to let the whole community, gaming community, know that NYFA is a great place to come, not only to learn how to make games, but to socialize and meet wonderful people that make games. Tonight's guests have worked for LucasArts, Lego, and Walt Disney Imagineering. His gaming career started with the graphic adventure game, The Day of the Tentacle. That's correct, right?
That is.
All right. And he went on to create The Curse of Monkey Island, the award-winning Lego Mindstorms, and all of the game experiences that guests can play in Disney theme parks, ships, and resorts all over the world. He is currently Executive Creative Director of the Disney Play app. Please welcome our guest and a master of game design, Jonathan Ackley.
Thank you.
All right. So, as per tradition with the Masters of Game Design, I always start with a very hard question, and that is, Jonathan Ackley, what's your favorite game?
Oh. My favorite game?
Yeah.
Heroes of Might and Magic 2.
2. Why 2 over 1?
The colors were more charming and I thought more beautiful, which is a strange way to judge a game. But I thought it was super deep while still being accessible, and I just thought it was quality all the way through.
Nice, a fellow art snob. Excellent. What was the first game you remember playing? And about how old were you when you were playing it?
I was probably 8.
Uh-huh.
And we were at the local circus-themed pizza place, and it was probably, I think, Shootout.
Oh, okay.
The old Atari game, or Outlaw, rather.
Outlaw, yeah.
Outlaw. With gray characters. You could see the scan lines, and it was awesome, because when you shot the moving chuck wagon, it actually left a pixel-sized hole in the side of it. It was fantastic.
Very cool. So you started your career as a programmer, is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
And when did you first start programming? What system did you learn? What language did you learn?
I was 13, and I convinced my mother to buy me a Timex Sinclair with powerful 2K memory, but with the 8K memory expander.
Fancy.
But it had the chiclet keyboard and was badly made, and so when you pushed it, it would rock the 16K expander out of the back, shutting it off and rebooting it. So my mother, very intelligently, returned it the next day and brought home an Atari 400, which also had a chiclet keyboard, but I was much cooler with, and a BASIC cartridge, and so I started learning on that, which was maybe my favorite machine I've ever programmed on.
Wow, okay, cool. Well, good for Mom. Tape loading?
Yeah, cassette. Yeah, although later upgraded to a Percom double-sided, double density.
Nice quality. So what did you make on it? What were you programming back then?
My first major graphics program was called Smurf Kill.
So this must have been in the early 80s.
It was in the early 80s, and I had learned to draw a Smurf in graphics mode 4, and then I hooked it up to the joystick, and you just pulled down on the joystick, and spikes came down from the top and killed the Smurf. It was it was almost an art project, I'd say.
Very nice. So you went to school at Santa Cruz? UC Santa Cruz?
Yes, to study film, because clearly no one could make a living making games.
Right. Well, I mean, how did learning about film and TV production help your career?
So I entered the field at a very interesting time. So there was a transition from like exceedingly small teams to the point where the team was like a one-person team into much larger teams. And some of the early, implementers had a hard time making that transition. Right. But coming from film school, where you have to do a lot of projects and juggle a lot of things, and you have to learn more about production, and then I was just lucky enough, through pure nepotism, to get into LucasArts, which is a company where it was both interactivity and storytelling together. Right. And so it just really fit me well. So I was able to sort of scale up with the changing technology and the higher data and the better graphics. And then I was able to apply the storytelling with the technology, and I got trained by the people who were the best in the world at doing those things, so that didn't help. Sorry, it didn't hurt.
So, what was it like being a programmer at LucasArts? Like what was that? What was the company like? And particularly, well, let's hear what it was like. I have a couple other more pointed questions about that.
I think when I started, it was 35 people. It was a very small company, the games group.
Right. And this was up in
San Rafael.
Okay.
And so it had a family vibe. Everybody knew everybody else. Everybody knew everybody's business. So in sort of a way, it was like a small town where there was no privacy or anything. I had just married my wife when I started there, and rumors were going around that Casey and I were dating. So that was, it was probably the most talent-dense company for games that I've ever worked at. There was just, every team was packed with stars. So at that time you had Rebel Assault was coming out, Day of the Tentacle, Sam & Max Hit the Road was coming out. They were just, and we were all sort of doing it in service to the great art, right? Because, when you're that age, that's what you care about.
Sure.
But for me personally, what I remember most was pure anger. Because the computers were so dumb. And you really had to just pour all the power of your hate into it, as if you were Sauron creating the Ring of Power, because the computer would just do what you told it, not what you really wanted it to do. Right. And so I actually thought that was a great job for a young man, because as a young man, you have a lot of anger and chock full of hate, and I could just focus on defeating this computer that was trying to stop me from making my game.
So I assume, since you're working at LucasArts during this early time, you're dealing with the Scum system.
Mm-hmm.
And so how is it to program for that, since it's such a kind of a classic? People still speak of it very fondly.
It was great. So
for those of you that don't know, Scum is
script creation utility for Maniac Mansion.
Exactly, and it's kind of the tool. Correct me if I'm mistaken, but it's essentially Lucas's way of thwarting a parser for a text adventure game.
Right. So it was developed by Ron Gilbert and Eric Wilmander, and they actually took a whole year just working on the first engine to create Maniac Mansion. And not a lot of game developers have sort of that leeway to work on your tools and get those great before you work straight into the game. And so Ron Gilbert, obviously, he is a master of game design. And he knew the kind of the game that he wanted. It actually did have a parser, but you clicked on the words, which was a little frustrating in the first sorts of games. But he created a suite of tools, all with highly inappropriate names, to help you make the games and make them really, really... So you didn't have to worry so much about the low-level programming. It was all handled for you in the compiler. So the tools we had were phlegm, bile, cyst, and I'm not going to say the other one.
It's like Carlin's 7 words. Right?
But it allowed you to focus on the making of the game rather than trying to deal with the horrible 286 and 386 technology of the date.
You weren't wrestling with it.
But you still had to wrestle with it, because I think for Day of the Tentacle, which was the first major game I worked on, you had the only memory you could get to was a total of 124K. So all the graphics, all the code, all the sounds had to fit in 124K, which is not a lot of K. So we would have to do things. We had a tool called DK where the artist would come with these beautifully scanned, colored, painted pieces of art, but they wouldn't fit. They'd be like 5K over. So we'd run this tool called DK, which would essentially smear it to increase the runs of color so it would compress better. And so the art would come in beautiful, and then I would get it and I would ruin it.
So I'm sure you made a lot of friends with the art team.
Oh yeah, my partner on Curse of Menehune, Larry Ahern, was always trying desperately to remove my art from the game, but he never could remove all of it.
That's funny. So LucasArts at the time, and ultimately for the betterment of the product that was being made, but notoriously George Lucas had said, I don't want any Star Wars games, I don't want any Indiana Jones games. Is that correct?
I wasn't around during that, that part. There were certainly lots of great Star Wars games,
Eventually Rebel Assault.
Rebel
right?
Assault, but there was Empire Strikes Back, SNES. There were NES titles, and then of course the Larry Holland games, X-Wing, X-Wing versus TIE Fighter, all just fantastic. And then of course, my personal favorite, probably my favorite because it's the one game that I finished, was Dark Forces.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Which was a really great
first-person shooter,
3D shooter. Yeah. Rob Huebner and Ray Gresco.
So you're saying
Justin
that
Chin.
that is a myth that George said at first. No Star Wars.
I don't know if it was. I just wasn't around. I wasn't, like employee.
You weren't hanging out.
I wasn't
with
employee
George.
number 5 up on the ranch. Yeah.
You weren't hanging out with George.
We weren't
having
hanging out with
lunch or
George.
anything.
No.
Okay, fair enough.
Food at the ranch was really good though.
Yeah. What was your favorite thing there?
Probably my girlfriend at the time.
Fair enough. All right. So LucasArts is where you met your. Is it fair to call him your creative partner, Larry Ahern?
Mm-hmm.
How was having a creative partner benefited your career?
Well, I don't pretend to be an art director, and anyone in this room who's seen my art will know that if I tried, I really couldn't get away with it. But what I would say is I've benefited everywhere I've gone with just spectacular luck that all my development teams have been fantastic. And so if you surround yourself with people who are smarter, better than you are, and then you take all the credit, it works out really, really well. So, Larry is a fabulous artist, a great designer, and a hysterical writer. And to the point where when I moved on and was making theme park games, I hired him to come in. So I would, come up with the overall game concept and like, here's how it works and here's the mechanic. Now, Larry, you do it. So as soon as the work gets hard, I bring in other people to complete it for me.
That's pretty smart. All right. So Day of the Tentacle, you said that my question was, what were your contributions to the game, which is ruining the art?
Yeah, pretty
much. How about any funny stories about working with Dave Grossman or Tim Schafer?
Oh. Well, there was Tim's Pez collection.
Okay.
He had a huge Pez collection. And then he had a huge collection of also snow globes.
Oh, yeah.
Let's see, not from Day of the Tentacle, because we were just focused on coding the thing the whole time. What I would say is my contribution to Day of the Tentacle was being a frustrated writer, and this was one of the great things about LucasArts. They draw no distinction between technical and creative, which I advise everyone in this room who's going into games production, look at it that way. Don't say, oh, that's the creative guy, he doesn't need to know about the tech, or that's the tech guy, I'm not going to let him influence my game design. Everybody's an artist when you're putting these things together. Peter Chan, who was the lead background artist, they actually brought in Chuck Jones because they wanted to get box copy quotes from Chuck Jones. And so Chuck Jones came and he looked at the animation, and this was the first PC game that had large characters doing that sort of Warner Brothers style animation. And I looked at the brilliant art from Peter Chan. And so Chuck Jones paid back LucasArts by then trying to steal Larry and Peter Chan and hire them away.
Did he succeed?
He did not succeed. No, they were having too much fun.
Good for them. Cool. All right. So another person that you worked with is a mutual acquaintance, Steve Purcell.
Sure.
On Sam and Max Hit the Road, what was it like working on a game where a person that you were already working with owned the IP?
I don't have a lot to say about that. So I had finished up Day of the Tentacle, and Day of the Tentacle started, I don't know, 6 months before Sam Max hit the road.
Right.
So I rolled off Day of the Tentacle into Sam and Max, but primarily they had their programming team.
Right.
So I edited and added all the sound effects.
Oh, okay.
Which is probably the funnest programming job you can have, because you don't have to worry about logic. You just like, where do I put the fart noise? And so that was just really fun. If you've ever played the game, there's a mini game called Whack-A-Rat, where simply the rats pop up, and when you click on them, a huge mallet comes down and smashes them. I had the best time doing the sound effects for that.
Nice.
But Steve is great.
Yes, he
and brilliant. He's working at Pixar right
Yep.
now. I know he was a major contributor to Brave and to the Toy Story Christmas special.
Yeah.
So he's just a brilliant guy, and those characters are hysterical.
Yeah, they are great. And they were kind of the unofficial mascots of LucasArts, right, for a long time?
Yeah, and they would find their way into every game.
Right. They were like in the newsletter also and things like that.
Yes, Steve would. I don't think they necessarily paid him for it. I think he just wanted to draw
Right.
twisted cartoons and put them in the company catalog.
He can't help himself. So, all right. So, Full Throttle was the next game you worked on. What?
Oh, yes. Sorry, Full Throttle.
So, I have to ask, what does Special Biker Haiku credit mean? Because that's what you're listed as in the credits, under Special Biker Haiku.
Well, there are a lot of biker haikus at the end.
Right. Did you author Special Biker Haikus?
I did, and I was proud of my haiku. So he asked everybody in the company to submit a biker haiku because he wanted to put it in the end credits. And I knew that I was up against some stiff competition, some great writers. So I figured the only way I was really going to, to make my mark in the biker haikus, I just wrote the most disgusting haiku about a biker crashing.
Oh, okay.
And I got a good reaction of disgust from Tim, and I considered that a victory.
Kind of your dead man's curve of biker haikus.
Yes, I recall, though our office manager, Michelle Hinners, actually kind of won the haiku contest because her haiku, the last line was, she wrote it from the perspective of Tim Schafer, and the last line was, "Maybe now I'll get chicks." So it was good.
Yeah, that is good.
Biker haiku.
Cool. Curse of Monkey Island. Why did you decide to use traditional animation rather than pixel art?
Well, pixel art was very tired. So actually there was a game in between Full Throttle and Curse of Monkey Island, which was The Dig.
Oh, right. Yeah, the archaeological. On the moon, right?
It starts off at the moon, and then you go to Casitas.
Okay.
And one of the criticisms of The Dig was it looked old-fashioned.
Because it was pixel art.
Because it was pixel art. Because it had a very long development cycle. Like it was 5 years from when it was first pitched.
Right.
And there were 4 or 5 different versions of The Dig, and I was on 2 of them.
Oh. So it became obsolete as you guys were developing it. I mean, not obsolete, but old-fashioned.
The technology was dead, the little tiny characters. And I think the artists who worked on that did a really good job, but they were asked not to take it in a different artistic direction than the old one because, they'd already spent so much time and money on these assets.
Sure.
We're not going to throw it away and start off with a new. So there were a couple things. People look back and they're like, oh, well, the art on Monkey 1, you had those realistic-looking characters. Why didn't you go for photorealistic? Well, there's a reason that animated movies look the way they do. And if you go back and you actually play those old games and you see the close-ups of Mancomb, Seepgood, and Guybrush Threepwood, the animation is...
Yeah.
And secondly, they can't really act. So if you're doing a hand-drawn game and they don't have a large expressive face, the characters come across as lifeless and dead, which is why cartoon characters look the way they do, and they have the exaggerated eyes. So if you go with normal proportions, as most of the traditional games, you would get a very boring-looking character who didn't have expressions large enough to read. So we did a couple things. We upgraded all our tools to high-res, or what was considered high-res at the time. 640, 480 square pixels. We were dealing with 320, 200 rectangular pixels before. And then there were new technologies coming out, digital ink and paint and digital drawing. And one of these was called US Animation, which was a vector toolkit. And they came by and they brought, I think, like a whole van to demo their SGI-based tool. And they showed how you could scan in a 2D drawing, make it a vector, scale it up, scale it down. Wow, you could scale it really big and the line still looks good. And then digital ink and paint. Whereas before on most of the previous games, you had to, you were pixel painting with D-Paint or D-Paint Animator, if you remember those tools.
Which is like laying bathroom tile, because I did a lot of that.
Yes. And so now we realized, we had the desire to do high-end animation, and now we had the tools that would allow us to do it and set up that pipe from the artist into the tools so that it works. And it really, I like to think the game holds up well,
Oh yeah,
although I have to say when I put in the God of War, I looked at those graphics, I'm like, yeah, I'm a dinosaur. But I do think that the cartoony, stylized characters hold up 20 years later.
Yeah, I mean, for my money, I think it's still one of the most beautiful graphic adventure games ever made, even to this day.
Yeah, and our lead artist, Bill Tiller, he just really knocked it out of the park. He was the lead artist on The Dig, and so there was some concern. It's like, well, can he only do shaded rocks? And he came in with this beautiful storybook style backgrounds. Yeah. And we're like, yes, that's it. Just make more of those. And so he made a whole game of what to me feels like the feeling of getting on Pirates of the Caribbean for the first time when you're 6 years old.
Yeah, no, it's great. One of the best things about Curse of Monkey Island is it's genuinely funny game. All the Monkey Island games are funny, but how hard is it to make a funny game? Or how easy is it to make a funny game?
So I will say it is much harder to make a serious adventure game than it is to make a funny adventure game. Now, obviously, there are a lot of programmers who are not very funny and they write dialogue for their video games, and you're like, oh. But the problem with adventure games is that what the characters are doing is so dumb that when you try and make a serious game out of it, the answer is no one would ever put the fish hook in the chewing gum and tie it to the cat's tail to catch the key that's hanging off. You just wouldn't do it. Every adventure game puzzle in the world is solvable with a rock. The guard won't let me to the door. Use rock with guard. You are now past this is why you never give anybody a gun in an adventure game. You never give them anything really useful. So that you have to, so that's one of the challenges when you're trying to make a serious adventure game. You have to come up with all these contrived puzzles that somehow you think, yes, maybe a human being would do that leap of logic, but the truth is
maybe even not.
But what we did at LucasArts is we hired programmers who could write. And that just worked out fantastically. Some of the best writers that I've ever worked with were programmers. I hired one fellow named Chuck Jordan who was doing banking software in Atlanta. And we brought him out for a week and gave him programming tests and just said, tag everything in this room and write something funny for it. Huh. And it was hysterical. And just what you want is you want people to come and contribute to the game. So it's not just, this is not Jonathan's vision, right. Because then the game will be lesser when it is over, because then it will just be Jonathan's vision. But if you invite supremely talented people in to add to it, then again, you get to take credit for it. So.
Fair enough. All right, how about insult sword fighting?
Insult sword fighting.
What is your favorite insult sword fight line?
I'm going to defer to the master, Ron Gilbert, and just say you fight like a cow.
Thought you were going to say that.
So I had to I'm the one who recoded that for Curse of Monkey Island, and it seems so elegant in design.
Yeah.
When I'm clearly my favorite puzzle of my favorite adventure game, which was Secret of Monkey Island, and it just seems so natural. But when you actually go through it, the rules are very complicated, and it is very hard to program.
Yeah. Give us an example, if you remember.
I just remember it was many, many, many pages of code. And the fact that Ron Gilbert was able to just come up with, the concept that sword fighting in the movies is less about whether the guy's good with the sword, but more about how good he is with a quip, and then figuring out a way to express that in this interactive art form was fantastic. So then when we recreated for Curse of Monkey Island, we wanted people to know, yes, this is Ron's puzzle, but we're not just going to phone it in. We're going to make it hard for ourselves by making all of the insults rhyme. So we just wanted to show that we weren't just lazy and stealing Ron's great idea. We were stealing Ron's great idea, but we were working for it.
Right. Well, it worked out nicely. I wish I remembered them. Okay, so I have something here called...
You fight like a Shar-Pei. I look that much like your fiancé?
Very good. I don't have a retort. You fight like a cow.
How appropriate. You fight like a dairy farmer.
Very good. I lose. Touche. What was Vanishing Act?
Oh, that was an adventure game concept that Larry and I worked on after Curse of Monkey Island.
Yeah. And what was the theme for it? Or can you talk anything about it? Or?
Not so much. I had done 5 major adventure games at that point, and so I helped Larry finish up the game design, and then left the company. My wife and I wanted to start our own sort of game consultancy. Mm-hmm. And so we did that for a year, and then decided that we wanted to start a family. And if we were going to start a family, I needed a full-time job. Right. So she continued to freelance, and I took the job at Lego Mindstorms.
Okay. And now where was Rocket Science Games between that?
Rocket Science Games was between LucasArts and LucasArts.
Okay.
So I'd done Day of the Tentacle, Sam Max Hit the Road, and was the first programmer on Full-Throttle. And then I'd worked with Brian Moriarty on his version of The Dig briefly, and so he recruited me to come work at Rocket Science Games. Okay. And I spent 10 months at Rocket Science Games, and their game genre was streaming video. They looked at the success of Rebel Assault, and they're like, we're going to base a whole business around streaming video games. Right. And I will say I worked with like the best in the business at LucasArts, but I learned more about making games in my 10 months at Rocket Science because I got to see everything that you should not do making a game. I'm very honest about that because you work at a place that really knows what they're doing, and you just take it for granted. Oh, everybody must make games like this. They sell, they get great reviews. Not the case at Rocket Science.
What's an example of something you learned from that experience?
Listen to your game designers. It was the convergence, those who don't know, Rocket Science was the convergence of Silicon Valley and Hollywood.
Yeah. It was the hot company.
Yes, they coined the term Sillywood, which I'm glad has not caught on. And mostly they wanted to make games. I mean, they wanted to make movies, really.
Oh, right.
Yeah. And so they were branching, streaming movies. And
kind of like Sewer Shark or Dragon's Lair or those guys?
Much more like Sewer Shark.
Okay, all right.
So it was Sewer Shark, but they had brought in, again, some brilliant people. they had brought in a bunch of brilliant artists from ILM, and they were doing their assets literally at ILM resolution quality. But what those poor artists didn't realize is that when it got crunched down to fit on a Sega CD, their beautiful art got chopped into 8x8, 8-color tiles. And so they invested a tremendous amount of money in just fantastically brilliant art, which then was made to look horrible so that it would fit and stream and fit within palette resolution. Right. So after 10 months of that, I realized I need to get back to LucasArts. And so then I came back and helped finish up Full-Throttle.
Okay. Do you think that they were just maybe a little too ahead of their time?
No.
No, not at all? Okay.
No.
All right, that's good. Good to know. All right, so so you finished Curse of Monkey Island, and then you took that time to explore doing your own thing, and then you said, I've got to get back to work, and so you went to work for Lego.
Yes.
And were they here in the States, or were they back in Norway or Sweden? Or?
They were opening an office in Novato,
okay.
which is just one city north of San Rafael. And it was a lovely little office that looked out on a wetland, so I would program, and there'd be blue herons over here, and it was very nice. And it was a wonderful company. You learn something new every place you go. This place, the programmers largely came from Broderbund.
Right.
So that was an older company than LucasArts, and I learned something magical from them. You can make software and go home at 5 p.m. Because we did not do that in the games industry.
Sure.
And so I was sitting there, and I was, ready to burn the midnight oil, and all the other engineers stood up and walked out, and I said, where are you going? And they're saying, we have lives, we're leaving. And that was an amazing thing. And we still shipped high-quality product, and we did not kill ourselves to do it. It was, again, some fantastic programmers whose technical chops still astonish me. But Lego was a wonderful company, probably still is a wonderful company, privately owned. Obviously, we all love the toys. The world has loved the toys since the 1930s. And they believe in the product, and you believe in the product, and you are just working to just not let the kids down, right? Because Lego means something.
Right, quality.
And so we did the Robotics Instruction System 2.0, and if you want, I can talk about all the incredibly boring things I implemented that I'm super proud of.
Tell us a few.
My script exporter, yeah. My expandable macros, which you can then edit yourself, and then add new blocks to create new macros.
Yeah, cool.
Are you all awake?
So you were enabling young programmers.
Exactly. Yeah. Oh, and we had real variables, not just counters. Nested loops. Anyone?
So
as he quickly moves on.
No. I mean, what was it like switching over from a purely digital product, like a video game, to something that had a physical component to it?
It was neat, although I have to admit that I was terrible at making robots.
Like building the robots.
Building the robots. So the interesting thing about robots, even toy robots, is they're robots and they have to work. And so my robots that I would create just to test my programs, I called them the Explodobot because they generally skidded across the floor, hit the wall, and blew up. But they hired MIT industrial engineers to design and build their robot kits. So there was just a brilliant fellow, his name was Anthony Fudd. And I thought, oh, I'm just making a cute little game for kids. And he's like, Jonathan, you got to see this thing I built. I'm like, okay. So I go down, he's built a tower. And on the top of the tower, there's a motor that spins, and there's 3 dart guns. And we were working on the product called Vision Command, which was in the year 2000, vision for toy robots with camera-based vision. And so he presses a button, and the camera starts looking around. And attached to the camera is this Gatling gun of darts. And then he takes another robot, and he puts a red ball on the top, and he presses a button, and it starts going. And it's looking, and it's looking. And I swear there was an evil intelligence to it, because it went Bam, 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 bam. Shot all 3 darts. 2 of them hit the ball and shot it off the thing. Like,
Wow.
So that was an eye-opener. That let me know that all technology is really amoral, and it's really how you apply it.
So when the robot overlords take over, will you be friends or foe? Or will they remember your work? Or?
I think they will know that I served them well.
Fair enough. The game did really well, and it was really popular, and it's still to this day has an active community. There's still people that are using even the older sets and building things from them and all that. Do you participate in that community at all?
No, because as I mentioned, I'm terrible at making robots.
All right. But did you ever kind of peek in on what goes on, or?
No, because you get to be an adult and you have kids and you have another job and you just kind of have to focus on
Your kids
that.
never got into making robots, or?
They made some robots.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe. Any? Many? It was never a focus of theirs, I don't think.
And you didn't force it on them, so.
And I did not inflict
That's
it on
good.
them.
Good
no.
dad.
They did build the Tower of Barad-dûr out of Legos, however.
Ah, impressive. Okay, so from Lego was Imagineering?
Yes.
How did that happen?
Well, Lego didn't have a great year one year, and so our office closed. And Imagineering was the place when I got out of college that I first sent my resume, and I got back that "we got it" postcard. So this was 10 years after that, and I guess I had built up enough interesting projects that they had called me back. And I wasn't really looking to move, but suddenly found that Lego was closing, and so it was fortunate at exactly that same time I got an offer from Imagineering Research and Development, which at the time was not focused solely on theme parks. It was actually corporate research and development. But they brought me in because they were working on the Enhanced TV project, which was synchronized web content for live TV shows. So that was Monday Night Football, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, and the Oscars, strangely enough.
Right.
And so I brought in and joined that team and eventually was running the team. And so that was my entrance to Imagineering.
Right. And why do you think that the synchronized, I remember when they were talking about that, and it was the wave of the future, but we're not quite, we don't quite have that anymore. What do you think, why that didn't catch on the way that it could have?
Well, so I haven't followed it up, so I know that there's other implementations of that, which, it was relatively popular at the time.
Sure.
But if I were to critique not that project, but say the whole sort of two-screen solution,
Right.
is what I felt is I would be at home playing along because it was my job to play along.
Right.
And my wife would be in the room with me and would be very uncomfortable because if you analyze watching TV with your friends and your family, you will actually realize that TV is very social. And you are talking the whole time and you're all paying attention to one thing. When you're looking down at the TV, I got the sense that Casey really wanted to talk, but she felt uncomfortable because she knew I was focused on this game. And I would become uncomfortable because you become acutely aware that someone else in the room is uncomfortable. So I think you need, and maybe somebody has already done this, I think you need to add a social component that works with the inherent nature of television being a social experience,
Right.
rather than just focused down at the computer.
Yeah, and I think that they're maybe still wrestling with that, right? With the phone now, everybody is on their phone watching something else while they're also in the room watching television.
Yes, well, I've noticed certain members of my family take after me and they play games while watching the TV and don't care how uncomfortable or antisocial it is.
Well, times have changed also. So then after that, you worked on branded cell phones? Is that?
That was actually a super fun project.
Okay.
Yeah, so actually I was the first mobile phone developer for the Walt Disney Company, and it was just because my boss at Research and Development came in and said, I got this new phone. do something with it.
What kind of phone was it?
It was a Nextel i88 with mid-P 1.0, which is the mobile instruction set for Java for cell phones.
Right.
A little tiny screen and really terrible resolution, so I was already used to working on hardware like that. And I coded in Java a version of our ETV client. And from there, I just played with it and did lots of prototyping, and then worked with corporate new business development. And we were sort of the tech wing for them, and worked with them to launch the Disney Mobile and Mobile ESPN concepts for the company. And they were really, it was great, because you learn so much. Like every project that I've been lucky enough to do has been weird and new. So we take mobile development now for granted, but back when it was an i88, and then the i88S had GPS, which was very exciting. And you never know when you're going to use it. So I didn't use that for years. We did the mobile phone company, and then I went back to R&D. And one day my boss came to me and said, "You used to do adventure games. We could use an adventure game in Epcot with Kim Possible. Do something." And so I looked around, and I had these phones. Like, well, I could probably do something with that. And so taking what I first did in the industry, making adventure games, then, I'd spent years working on mobile phones, putting the two of them together, and now adding theme parks. So now it looks like a natural linear progression, but at the time it was just appeared quite random. Yeah.
Right. So Kim Possible, tell us about, like, what was it like to I mean, you said your boss came to you and said, "Hey, do something with this phone," but did anybody expect kind of the response would be, "Let's bring the phone into the theme park to play something"? Because I have a little experience with this as well, and I know that there was always resistance to that. They were always like, "Oh, how dare they be on the phone when we've got this whole beautiful place that we've built?" Was that ever an issue with Kim Possible?
I don't think so. So, I mean, you've worked in Imagineering, and they are open to trying ideas.
Sure.
And so that's one of the advantages of working in research and development is if you're not failing occasionally, you're not doing really good research and development, then it's just development. Right. So the company was actually very, very supportive of it. I didn't expect that it was going to become a permanent theme park attraction. I thought, hey, I'm an R&D guy, I got this new technology, I'll use it to show how maybe mobile in the future might be used in a theme park, and then I'll go back and I'll do some other R&D project. And what the phone allowed you to do is it allowed you to actually manipulate things in the physical world in a theme park without them breaking or people getting hurt. Right. And so that was really what I was trying to get across. It's like, hey, you could use mobile and you could still manipulate these cool themed objects, but you don't have to worry about, somebody putting their arm through the ship's wheel and then the brother spinning the ship's wheel real hard. Right. So, but it was very well received. And so one of the difficult parts about research and development is called tech transfer. It's like there are lots of great new ideas, but the people in the business unit have a day job, and they have to do that day job, and they can't always take the time that somebody in research has taken to figure out how to do something. So then they picked me up, and they made me a producer of interactive theme park attractions.
Oh, okay.
So again, it seems totally natural now.
Yeah, of course. What was your favorite experience when creating the Kim Possible experience?
Well, I'm an emotional guy, and we had installed the Kim Possible World Showcase Adventure, and when you're working on video games, you don't generally get to see people playing your games.
Right. Yeah, almost never.
But if there's something they don't like about your game, when they do find out about your game, that's like So like the best you hear is somebody says something nice in a review, or something says somebody nice on a news group, and then somebody after them would reply and say, no, that sucks.
Never read the comments.
But when you're doing theme park interactivity, you actually get to see the human beings playing it, and not just in the, I'm a zombie staring at the computer screen. So we were in the Japan Pavilion at Epcot World Showcase, and we're watching, testing, making sure the game plays. And this adorable little girl runs up, triggers the interactive fountain, the water rushes down. She jumps up and down, runs up to strangers surrounding her, and yells, "I did it, I did it, I did it." And I cried because it was so dear and so wonderful. And it's just those moments that, like, maybe games are adding value to the world in some way. Yeah. And so that was probably my favorite moment.
That's great. So from Kim Possible, you went on Midship Detective Agency?
Mm-hmm.
And so what was it like building an experience on a ship? The ship was working while you were working on it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what was it like now? Like the luxury that you get at the parks is that they close and you can go in when people aren't there. But I assume on the ship there's always people around.
Well, so I kind of got lucky on that one. So I did the design and another team had to build it.
Oh, okay.
So that was great for me because we did play testing on the existing ships, which meant we had to spend, a playtest week on a luxury cruise. And then the other team had to go to Papenburg, Germany in winter and install it. And then, so
very good timing.
I had really good timing, but I was very happy with how the game came out. If you don't know what the game is, there's magic art all across the Disney ships, and you get a detection device. And when you hold up that detection device, it reveals, hidden clues behind the magic art that's spread out through the entire ship. And I also realized I didn't describe what the Kim Possible World Showcase Adventure is. It is literally a LucasArts adventure, but where all the clues are given to you on a cell phone, and you search the World Showcase at Epcot, which is a mile-round pavilion, and you go on sort of Get Smart-style secret agent missions where you're doing things like triggering the weather machine to make it rain and lightning inside a building, or cause a gargoyle on the walls of the Notre Dame Cathedral to stick out his tongue. Stuff like that. Very, very normal things. Like you do.
Like you do. So was there anything on Midship Detective Agency that you had to adjust design-wise because of the fact that you're on a ship rather than, dry land, essentially? Like, did you have to compensate for the roll of the ship? Well, those are big ships, so they don't have roll. But anything that was like unique to that environment rather than what you would find in World Showcase?
It had to be easily maintainable, right? Our theme parks have spectacular, tons of operators, tons of technicians, tons of repair people, cruise ships in the middle of the ocean,
right.
Sharks in the water, and so it just you just have to make the technology behind it bulletproof.
Right.
But the game design is I find a constant from computer games, video games, theme park games.
The fundamentals still apply.
Fundamentals of game design, like those found in your book, all absolutely apply to location-based gaming equally to photonic gaming.
Right. Cool. How was the food on the ship?
Oh, so good.
All right. So from there, then you had another really tough assignment.
Oh, you're going to talk about Hawaii, aren't
Yes. Now you had to go to Hawaii, the Menehune Adventure Trail at Alani.
you? Yeah, you got to pity me.
Yeah, I know. You were living a rough life.
Mm-hmm.
How was it How was making that experience different from the other ones that you had made? Like, what was the thing that you're like, all right, I've already done these other two things. They've been very well received. they like what? How are you going to make something different, or was that even a goal?
It was a goal. So one of the key things about the Menehune Adventure Trail, which you took a mobile device and the magical Menehune of Hawaii lead you around and do things like, expose a sculpture of a shark by creating a wall of fire appear. We kind of just got more ambitious with it. There's a big sculpture of a whale, and the magic actually makes it spout. Things like that. But the stories we were telling were very much rooted in the stories of Hawaii. Right. And that is the goal of the Aulani Hotel, which is not to represent ourselves as Hawaiians, but to be representatives of the people who are actually Hawaiians. So we actually worked directly with elders and cultural representatives of Hawaii to tell their stories. Right. And so they weren't, so much the flights of fancy and, the weird, crazy adventure game logic that we had done before. It was very much trying to work with the culture. And so just tonally, it's very different from, Bernard getting hit in the face with a shoe on Day of the Tentacle.
I mean, it's not serious. It's not like it's dour. But was there anything that was like was there anything that culturally they brought to you and said, we want you to do this, not because it's going to be fun per se, but because it's like culturally significant or important?
Yes, there was a lot of that, a lot of feedback. I actually brought in a local writer because I wanted the voice of the characters to be authentic, and I knew I couldn't deliver that. But I just want to gloat a little bit that these meetings we would have would be out on a lanai looking out at the ocean with whales spouting in the distance. So I just thought I'd rub that in a little bit.
Yeah. Okay, so then you went to Tokyo.
I did.
And you worked on the Leonardo Challenge at Tokyo Disneysea, which is a wonderful park, which I still have not been to, but one day I will get there.
It is a phenomenal park.
Right. From what they say, it's the best one.
I don't know about that, but it's gorgeous.
Okay. How was designing an experience for a Japanese audience different than designing for Westerners?
Japanese is a very difficult language to the point where there's two whole character sets for them. So giving instructions, so this is a paper-based, map-based game. There's a beautiful Renaissance fortress with all sorts of interactives spread through it. And it was our goal to add a story to this fortress. There are 5 different maps. You take them around. There are these magical map installations. When you put the map down on it, if you're in the right place, it triggers a special effect. So just so you know what the game is. So it was low-tech because it wouldn't make sense to have people walking around with a cell phone triggering things in a Renaissance fortress. The interface has to match the story. So we had to deliver all of the data that the player needed to know on these maps. And in terms of representing the Japanese characters, they take up a lot more space than just English, and you have the kanji and you have the katakana for very difficult words. And so again, very lucky because we're partnered in Japan with our operating partner there, and they provide us show adaptation experts. So they're not translators, they actually take the meaning as well as the words along with it. And so we would struggle just to fit the instructions on the map, and we would have conversations like, well, can you say this in a shorter way, which is go to the top of the staircase. It's like, well, yes, there is a shorter way of saying it, but it's essentially, get up there! And so that's not appropriate. So that was probably the biggest challenge was
length
in that. Also, the visitors to that park just super well behaved, and they do exactly what you tell them. So you have to be very careful about what you tell them. So we had this one installation where you go down into a ship in the harbor, and we say, look in the box. Now, there's a little peephole in the box, and you're supposed to look in the peephole. But it's also kind of dark down there. So the very first day we tested it, we said, look in the box. Well, people didn't see the peephole, so they simply ripped the top off the box so they could look into it. So we had to change those instructions.
Right.
So again, the challenges of working in a language you don't understand in a culture where you're still trying to find your way.
Maybe the lighting in that room as well.
Yeah.
So one thing I had noticed, not that I've physically done the activity, but I watched a lot of videos about it, and I noticed that the Leonardo challenge is much more physical. There's much more manipulation by the guest than there are in the Kim Possible and a lot of the other ones that you've created. Do you think that that's a cultural thing? That they're much more respectful of the item, other than ripping the box lid off? But
they only did that once.
They only did that once. But I mean, there seems to be like a lot of, work this handle to have this happen, or turn, there's a lot of physicality to the things going on in the challenges.
No, so we designed those, or I designed those, largely just because they fit within the space and the time that story is set.
Right, okay.
So it wasn't a high-tech story, so there's less techie things and more things that you would find
That you
in
get your hands on.
Leonardo's workshop.
Right.
And it was also already filled with a whole bunch of really great pre-existing manipulatives. So we were taking advantage of what the Imagineers had already put there.
Gotcha. So then Kim Possible was changed into Agent P for the Phineas and Ferb. What was it like to revisit something you had spent so much time on?
I thought it was great because it made it relevant for the new generation. I loved Kim Possible. It was a fantastic show. But that game came out, I believe we launched Kim Possible like the month after Kim Possible went off the air. Right. And then Phineas and Ferb, another fantastic show. And that's one that I know my children have watched over and over again. So it was great to tell different stories with the same technology and with those installations, and making it relevant for what kids were enjoying at that time. Was
there a gag in Kim Possible, or was there a gag for Agent P that you felt ended up better than the ones that were for Kim Possible?
We added some new ones, which were really fun. Perry Trapped in a Lamp is a particularly good one, where you're just looking for Perry. He's been kidnapped by Doofenshmirtz. And you find a lamp, and it's got a frosted outside, but when you press the button, it reveals Perry. The lamp then goes suddenly clear, and there's just Perry stuck in a lamp. So it's, just great characters make for a fun game.
Was that the same tech that you ended up using in Tinkerbell for play?
I don't know what you're talking about. Oh. That was just magic.
Okay. All right, fair enough. All right, so next was Sorcerer's the Magic Kingdom. And now, was that leveraging technology from the Midship Detective Agency, or was that something new? Like, where did that idea of like, hey, let's make a card game for a physical place?
So it's not the same technology at all. As a matter of fact, there is no technology. It's Merlin's magic.
Of course there is.
That's just that's probably the game I'm most proud of, because there's just nothing else like it in the world. It's weird, and I think we should all strive to be as weird and strange as possible. And so that game is largely a trading card game come to life. You have a key, and you search through Magic Kingdom. And with the key, you open up mystic portals, so what looks like a brick wall will suddenly open up and reveal a Disney villain. And then it's a trading card game, and so you pull out the spells that you want and think will work best against the villain. And these are spell cards that Merlin created, mind you. And you hold them out, and the ones that you hold out, those spells get cast at the bad guy. And it's a full role-playing game. It takes you all over the park several times before you face off with the evil Hades.
So what did you learn about designing card games from that?
Well, again, I brought in somebody who was better at it than me.
All right.
So
Who did you bring in?
I worked with a fellow named Mike Selinker.
Oh, of course, yeah.
And he's something of a legend in trading golf. And he made me so much smarter about trading card games. So really, yeah, just learned a ton. Learned a ton about technology, learned a ton about theme park operations, learned a ton about trading card games. And that's what I aspire to do with everything is never get comfortable, always try and do something that you haven't seen work before.
How many times does a player need to play Sorcerers of the Magic Kingdom before they experience everything?
I believe there are 9 missions.
Okay.
And there's an easy level, a medium level, and a hard level, which means you have to go all the way around Magic Kingdom six times
6 times to experience it.
to get the whole thing.
It's a good way to lose weight.
People do, in fact, play the game for exercise.
Yeah.
And some people come, it's the first thing they do in the morning. They play the game, and then they leave and go to work and get on with their day.
And are they still supporting it with new cards and content? Or?
Merlin just released a new card this week for the Mickey's Not So Scary Halloween party.
Yeah, okay, cool. Well, thank you, Merlin. So with all the annual passport holders at Disneyland compared to, the demographics at Walt Disney World are slightly different than Disneyland, why hasn't it been installed here in Anaheim? Because you'd think that with that many repeat customers, that would be a much better audience for a game with multiple levels and that kind of thing.
I just think the parks have different needs.
Yeah.
And Sorcerers really met the need of that attraction. As with all design doesn't exist for its own sake. It is to make improvements or strategic choices. So Sorcerers was designed for that park.
Right.
And that park and that location are just different than Disneyland.
Right. So is it fair to say then that play is the kind of a manifestation of that type of play pattern for Anaheim?
So Play Disney Parks, for those of you who don't know, that's my current project. And that is adding mobile digital theme park content to entertain our guests in queues and then just generally entertain our guests with digital content as they move through our theme parks. And I definitely think it's an extension of work that not only I've done, but other groups within Disney have done. Sort of disparate groups coming together, making their creative and technological contributions, and creating a platform that makes it easy to find the digital experiences and use them in the theme park. If you've ever worked in a theme park, they're really huge, they're really complicated. Guests might go to a theme park and they have to, if they want to play an interactive game, they have to download an app on their phone for this one, and they have to go to a website over here, and they have to borrow a device over here. With Play Disney Parks, our guests know exactly where to go now when they want to interact with the park in that way.
It's kind of the battle net for Disneyland. So I'm going to be a little critical about interactive experiences.
It's about my haircut?
No, not about your haircut. I'm not one to talk about hair. So many of the interactive experiences are designed to be updated, right? Just by the fact that they're digital, but they're very seldom are. Now, granted, Merlin is making new cards. That's awesome, but he's got magic to help him out. Why do you think, like the thing that comes to mind is like Star Tours, right? Like the original Star Tours was always supposedly designed to be, hey, we'll update the film, and it wasn't until they did the major overhaul that now they're actually updating content and things like that. What is it that's not having a place like Disneyland saying, hey, this month now there's new content this month, and now there's new content next month, and now there's new content like there is in video games.
I think we're doing that a lot more. I think we're doing that a lot better. I mean, obviously there was Kim Possible to Agent P,
Right.
but also there was Soaring Over California.
Right.
And then this summer they brought back or then they went to Soaring Around the World, and then they brought back for a special engagement Soaring again. And Star Tours, they did do that major overhaul, but between now and then they also added
Sherpa
new missions that go with the new movies.
Sure.
And so I definitely think it's something that we're doing and probably doing better than we have in the past. So yeah, it was probably true a while ago that people weren't thinking about that, but
now they are.
we definitely are, yeah.
Great. So that gives us something to go back for.
Mm-hmm.
Nice. What was a bit of guest behavior that happened that you didn't realize would happen with any of these experiences? So you had the little girl, bringing you to tears, but like, what's some other interesting guest behavior that happened as a result of any of these interactive experiences that you've created?
So there are real design issues, and then there are perceived design issues. And one of the perceived design issues were, in the Kim Possible attraction, we had these fixed special effects, and you would go up and you would trigger the special effect. And it was like, well, what if two people showed up at once, and somebody pressed the button, and it spoiled the effect for the other person? Like, oh boy, that could be a real dissatisfier. And so I thought, well, master of game design, I'm going to solve that. And so I designed it so that if two people showed up at an installation at the same time, and the location sensing knew they were in the right game state and standing in the right place, that if the first person pushed the button, it would say, you don't have enough power. Get the other agents around you to do it together. And then everybody, of course, would press the button. It wouldn't be spoiled for anybody, and they'd all see the special effect. They'd all feel like they triggered it. No one wanted to do that. They did not care that the effect was spoiled for them. It's the only time I gave the guest an instruction, and they just said, no frickin' way. They queued up. And what we learned was, in this interactive experience, it was the power and the feeling of controlling the environment that was the value, not the show. The show was cool. People liked the show. But what was important is that I pressed the button and I made the thing happen. Right. And so I learned that was the value. You want the thing that you can't get in your life elsewhere, which is control of the physical space and the cool theming. Right. So they just queued up, ignored my instructions, and played it the way they wanted to. And so we ripped that feature out.
But they were happy.
Yes, they were very happy. Did not care that they watched three people do it in front of them.
Right. So if you could make one existing Disney park attraction interactable or gameable in some way, which one would it be?
That's easy because I've been thinking about it since I visited Disneyland the very first time. I want to be able to fight the fort and the ship in Pirates of the Caribbean with my own cannons.
Nice.
And I have wanted to do that since I was a little kid.
Right. What's stopping you?
Laws.
Nice. So what's next for Jonathan Ackley?
I can't really talk about it.
Sure.
We'll probably be able to talk about it very soon, but I can't talk about it right now.
Okay.
I'm doing some...
but more things for Disney.
Yes.
More things for Disney parks.
Maybe.
More things for Disney-related properties.
I think I can say that without
based on Disney licenses of some sort?
Without spilling anything.
Right,
yeah.
okay. All right.
Yeah.
And, and definitely something different and new than what you were doing before.
That is the goal. Always the goal is to try and do something new. Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, thank you very much. So we're going to open up the floor for questions. So if you have any questions, please, there's a microphone in the back. Go ahead and ask Jonathan your questions.
All right, well, come on up. All right. 2 questions.
All right.
First off, while you were working at LEGO, did you ever get free LEGO sets like a Death Star?
We'll get probably the little box for free. But when we visited Billund, which is the headquarters of Lego in Denmark, and we did go a couple times, they have the store where the discontinued sets and the damaged sets are. And I would come back, I would buy bags so that I could come back with the sets to the point that the bags would be tearing. So we got discounts, but we did not get free sets at Lego.
All right.
Did your time at Lego predate all the licensed stuff? Or was that just starting when you were there?
It was contemporary with it.
Okay.
Yeah. I think my favorite one that I bought, which I don't think I ever took out of the package, but I own it, damn it, was called Lego Cybermaster, which was actually the robotic product before Lego Mindstorms, which was radio controlled instead of IR programmatically controlled, and it was battling robots.
Nice.
Wireless controlled. It's neat stuff.
All right. And second one. What was your favorite part about LEGO in general, like the company or whatever?
Just the belief in the product and the feeling that you were doing something good for kids. That was uniform throughout the company. Even though they wound up shutting down our division, I have nothing but love for that product and nothing but love for that company. It's just class all the way.
All right. Thanks.
So I was wondering if you have a rule of thumb for how much research you do for a project, and when you stop yourself before you start going down a wormhole of watching every single episode of a show like Kim Possible or Phineas and Ferb or projects like that, and when you say, okay, I think we know enough and we can really start working on this.
Well, it depends on the project. So for Aulani, I had to do a lot of research because I was not an expert on Hawaiian culture. So there's a lot of tours or a lot of books. There's a lot of talking to people who actually are of the culture. And then bringing in people, even during production, to double check what you're doing to make sure that you're artfully and accurately attempting to represent the culture. For other things where it's, a cartoon and, the stakes are less high than dealing with someone else's culture, you get Phineas and Ferb pretty quickly. But what I find is key is that the story you're telling and the interface and the technology with which you're going to tell a story have to come together at the very beginning of the design process. So I'm doing a high-tech spy thing. Makes sense that I'm carrying around a high-tech communicator that can do all sorts of magical things. If I'm in Renaissance Italy, cell phone's not going to work. I need to come up with something else that is magical, but is not driven by a cell phone. So harmonizing the interface and the story you're telling, and then once you have that, and you choose the game mechanic or mechanics that are going to make up the repeated mechanic of your game, then what I like to do is I do my own first playable, either through design or through design and prototype, and then I hire somebody else to do the rest of the work.
Thank you.
Sure.
So out of respect for the way you are talking about Merlin and his magical influence on the other experience,
Yeah.
in terms of Play Disney Parks, if it's fair to say that the fairy that powers that is a toothy blue fairy, Disney has an experience in their experimentation with using that type of magic in terms of physical interactivity in the parks. I was hoping you could speak to perhaps some of those experiments like Kudos and the the Ghost Post and all that cool stuff, and if you had any direct involvement in those.
No, and what I'm going to suggest, because I'm not well versed, is that maybe Scott bring in a Sarah Thatcher at one of these later discussions to talk about Ghost Post, because a great project, super cool, really neat stuff they've done for that. But I wasn't involved and haven't really done an analysis on those projects.
And there's too bad there's nobody in the room that could talk about Kudos.
Let me tell you about Kudos.
More general question. I'm not going to hide this one behind magic language. You said earlier that there were a lot of the basic game design, principles that apply to your location-based games that get people on their feet and moving around.
Yeah.
In what ways have you found that those designs need to be different? And what sort of affordances you have to make for people not sitting in one spot and interacting with it in one place?
So you may not be aware, Florida can get hot sometimes. Before we did the Kim Possible product, we actually did a play test, like 3 years before we actually launched. And we learned a lot of good things from that play test. The main thing is people don't like backtracking. So even if they're not walking very far, just tracing your steps back and forth can be very frustrating. So making sure that as you route them from location to location, they feel a sense of progression rather than regression is very important. Things that are different. You cannot add more theme park in the same way you can add more servers. So management of human bodies is definitely an art. So you have to deal with things called cycle times. So you have a certain number of installations. You have a certain number of installations that you feel the guest needs to go to get the full experience. You may come up with a system where if it's early in the morning, there aren't that many players, they go to more of the installations, and fewer later in the day. So, if it's not like Pirates of the Caribbean where it's, hey, we could double Pirates of the Caribbean, we'll just build another Pirates of the Caribbean right next to it. So you're working in meat space, and you have to be respectful of people's health, of the time that they're spending, making sure that the value that they're getting, not everybody gets to go to Disneyland anytime they want. You just have to be respectful of human limitations in a way that you don't really need to when somebody's just sitting in front of a computer and blowing things up with a mouse and a keyboard.
Hello. I have a question. How is your relationship with sound? How do you work? What's your process when it comes to sound?
I think sound is amazingly important. I think there's like 4 phases when developing like a video game. So start with like an adventure game. Phase 1, programmer art, but you can play through the whole thing. Phase 2 is when you get nice art. But the most profound change to a game is when you add the sound. That's when it goes from feeling like prototype software to something that, I could ship this. So sound is very important. That sound in a theme park has to harmonize with, again, the sounds around you. So you can't have bleeps and bloops in like a pirate game. And we've got one of those too.
Yes.
So I think it is core to selling the idea of that it's a real experience. So, in the pirate game, we have the Pirate's Adventure at Magic Kingdom. At one point, you magically light a fuse, and the fuse has fiber optics that burns down to a powder keg underneath the longboat, and it blows up, and the ship rolls up. And, it's the magic sword. And without those sound effects, it looks really unconvincing. Because it needs it, and I think people want to be able to play along with you as the game designer, but without the sound, they can't play along. It's like, nah, that's not real. Real things blow up with sounds.
I have another question. I mean, you just mentioned you look for realism, right, in sound. But what other aspect of sound do you look for that will harmonize with whatever project you're working on?
Well, it has to match the story. So I did sound effects for, let's just go way back to the beginning, for Day of the Tentacle, and that was Looney Tunes. So those were all whips and swish and pop. And then Sam and Max Hit the Road, again, cartoon characters, but not Chuck Jones style. And so when a character got hit in that game, it had to sound like it hurt a lot. The sound is part of completing that world that you're trying to express. And so sound design has to represent and complete the holistic vision of the world. So your game isn't complete unless you have the sound, and the sound isn't right unless it supports everything around it.
Thank you.
Hello. My question is related to the process of getting your idea accepted by Disney and the higher-ups from your initial idea to execution.
Well, I mean, I can't talk too much about Disney process, but what I will say is Imagineering is a very forward-looking organization. And that comes all the way from Walt. Walt always wanted to try new things. And that remains. So if the idea is interesting and people see that you believe in it, even if they don't see it fully, they're going to give you the opportunity to try and convince them that it's a good idea. And I've actually been, in some cases really surprised when I'll come in with something just really out there. But the organization is built on, we should do something that nobody else is doing. And so it's been a very supportive company of all sorts of my wacky ideas. And some of those ideas didn't work. And we're not talking about them here. But it's a company that believes in trying and failing and trying again, because that's what Walt did. Everybody said Walt was crazy when he when he decided to do a feature-length cartoon. They thought Disneyland was going to be a huge failure. Who in the world's going to go to this thing? And he relished in proving them wrong by trying wacky new things and really cool things. So that's really baked into the DNA of Disney. And it's one of the reasons why I really enjoy working there, is because they're almost afraid not to innovate. Because as fast as this world moves, you can't just follow the next guy. You really have to be leading. So I've had just nothing but support in trying weird things at Disney. It's a really good company for that.
Awesome, thanks.
Hi, so I have two questions. So my first question is, if there was one project that you've already created for Disney that you could take and turn into an experience for a different Disney property, what experience would you take and what property?
I don't quite know how to answer that, because the story and the characters help define the game itself. So even when we're doing adaptations, Kim Possible to Agent P, there have to be fundamental changes in how you write it and how the interactions are triggered. So I don't have one in particular. Like if I were to change one of the existing games, I would have to know what the new story was, and it would just have to be pure luck. Oh yeah, this story matches this game mechanic and technology perfectly. So it's difficult to say theoretically. I'd probably just want to start over and do something weird again.
All right. And my second question is, if there was one key piece of information that you wish you knew, or one piece of advice that you wish you could give yourself when you were just starting out, what would it be? Asking the hard questions for you.
It would be to shut up more. Honestly. I think this is a challenge that a lot of young men have. But leaving college, I was clearly the smartest guy in the room. And it benefits you when you learn that you're not. It takes the pressure off, and it allows people to support you more, and it makes your product better. And so learning that it wasn't all about me and my vision, and that really you have more fun and you produce a better experience if you're doing it with your talented group of friends and you're allowing them to contribute. That's, what I would have liked to know coming out of the college, which was just kind of get over yourself. Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Hey, Jonathan.
Hi.
It's interesting because as you've talked this evening, it's really there's things I've been kind of wrestling with regard to sort of the communal entertainment industry, episodic television or film, versus gaming, which is often a sort of a single, very individualistic experience. And what you're doing in theme parks kind of combines those two things. But when you told the story about the people, in the Kim Possible thing, they didn't want to work together to solve the problem, that kind of made me feel a little bit sort of sad. Because it's like, I feel like right now when people are being fed information, even our news, it's very much tailored to us as individuals. So you may go and talk about the day's events with your next door neighbor and have a completely different idea of what happened. And I was thinking about Pirates of the Caribbean, which, I like the films, but when I go now and Jack Sparrow is popping out of every other barrel, it's very different than the experience that I remember, and maybe it kind of rubs me a little bit the wrong way. And I was thinking about, well, geez, what if they customized it so that, my Bluetooth device told them, oh, I don't want to see so many Jack Sparrows. And then I realized that's kind of going against the grain of creating the communal experience so that me and the other people around me, when we're done, we can talk about what a great ride this was and the things that we all enjoyed or we didn't. Is there any way to kind of find more of a balance? Because I think I've been kind of struggling with this too, between the communal and the individual, the point where we get what we want, the kind of content that we each appreciate and that, suits our individual taste, versus the opportunity to sit around and talk with a bunch of other people about, what, this was really cool. That was, oh yeah, I remember that moment. That was fantastic. Because we seem to be really diverging, in terms of the entertainment products that we consume in kind of two different directions. And I feel like something is getting lost, as these two paths sort of diverge from each other. We're missing a lot of the stuff that I feel like, in the 80s and 90s that we really had that made some of those entertainment products so successful. So maybe you could talk to that a little bit.
Sure. So one of the things that I think need to be emphasized about those sort of Kim Possible and these location based activities is because kind of the sexy part of it is watching the special effect go off, is to remember that that is mostly not the game. And that the game mostly is a treasure hunt, right? If you're going to break it down to what the game is, a lot of these location-based things are treasure hunts. And the great thing about treasure hunts is they are things that families and groups do together. So the Kim Possible experience, now the Agent P experience, is very much a family activity because groups go together and they're told where to go, and the kids can run ahead, and they can look over here, and the parents can hang out over here, and mom can sip an adult beverage over in the Rose and Crown while the... So it actually is a multiplayer group game. It's simply that moment where you trigger the special effect, you get the little endorphin rush, and it tells you to go on, where they didn't want to give that up. So exploration and treasure hunt can still be group games. It's only when you're dealing with the scarce resources of who gets to push the button to make the thing happen. And I like to think that I got better at designing the games with Merlin on Sorcerers of the Magic Kingdom, because that's designed where everybody can hold up their cards and everybody can cast a spell and beat the bad guys. So, and no doubt I made mistakes on that game too. So you just try and get better. Making mistakes is part of doing new things. So, if I was perfectly secure in every game design decision I was making, I probably wouldn't be trying hard enough. But I agree that there's a tension between the personalized and the multiplayer aspect. And so I think you just have to reach back into your bag of game mechanics and say, what is a game mechanic that I can apply to location-based gaming? What are my design goals? And how can I express that in the physical world? Because the games that I've done, particularly Kim Possible, is very much just a LucasArts adventure game adapted for a physical experience, where I threw out all the things that aren't going to work hiking around Florida. So the game design lessons are still there. If you want a multiplayer experience, you can just look at those game mechanics that encourage that and just figure out a way to shoehorn it into your location-based experience.
Okay, and I guess this is basically just maybe a little bit of a follow-up on that, in that when you're in the lines, when you're in sort of the environment, but you're not actually yet on the ride, a lot of the stuff that you're talking about is also, meant to enhance people's sort of out-of-the-ride experience, turn that into part of the experience. And I guess the question, too, is how do you get people... when you were talking about, for example, trying to play the game while watching the TV and everybody else is feeling uncomfortable, it kind of does feel that way even when you're with other people and you're, like, on a phone or you're whatever, you're trying to participate, but, everybody's doing it on their own way. I guess that's another thing is, having a way of creating those, those aspects of the ride or those aspects of the experiences, making them, once again, more communally. You're in a unique situation because now people are going more into like VR or like these very specific things where they're very isolated, but you're like in one of the last places where people really are coming together to be entertained. And are there any other thoughts you have or any other new things that you could talk about that maybe you're sort of exploring still, that way of bringing people together even in those sort of preparatory phases of the ride?
Yeah, if you get a chance and you get out there and you play the games, you'll find that that particularly in the games that I've done in the parks, they're mostly heads-up experience. So there are very few mini-games on the phone because we want the game to be the park itself, and the handset is merely your interface and your instructions for navigating the park. For Play Disney Parks, where you're in a queue, that park navigation isn't really part of the design. So we do have more games on the handset, but the games are designed, again, heads up is what we say for Play Disney Parks, where the games are designed for multiplayer, either pass and play or direct interaction between guests within the same party. So probably my favorite of the games that we've done for Play Disney Parks is the Peter Pan's Flight Queue game, which is the least gamey game that we have. It's, I'm sure you've all ridden it. It's a game for younger families, parents, and smaller children. So that experience is simply designed to ask the guests to talk to each other about things that make them happy. So in the Peter Pan story, in order to fly to Neverland, you need hope, trust, and pixie dust, but mostly happy thoughts. So as they wait in the queue, the handset becomes the catalyst to ask them to talk about happy thoughts. What makes you happy? What would your dream pet be? Let's talk about what the best family vacation that we've ever taken has. And that is most of the game, is just using the phone to cue the guests to talk to each other, even as they're moving through the game. And I had to play test that with some old crusty computer programmers, and darn it if occasionally you don't choke up. Again, if that's your design goal, to bring groups together rather than isolating them, and that's definitely our goal. We're a family theme park, and we want those families to have a shared experience and build memories. And so we try and go out of our way to make that a shared interactive experience.
Thank you.
How you doing?
Hi.
So you have one of the most unique experiences in game design because you actually get to see them interact at a physical location, at a physical park. That being said, what has been one of your greatest aha moments or, experiences of human interacting in just a game design, like earlier in career? Like, what was one of the biggest things that, wow, people really like this, that you wouldn't be able to see playtesting on a computer?
So when we did Sorcerers of the Magic Kingdom, I was not an expert on trading card games. So, I knew the high concept. But we started playtesting, obviously, before we opened, to make sure that the magic was working, Merlin's magic. And what was astonishing was from the very first day of playtesting, guests were trading the cards. We handed out the cards, they got in line at each of the installations, and they would immediately turn around and start trading, which again was one of those social behaviors that had people. And so what I learned from that is they're just human behaviors. And you only really kind of get yourself in trouble with game design when you're trying to change the human behaviors. So you can really just look around and see these are behaviors that people already do. People like physical things. We're like raccoons. We like shiny things. And we like to trade our raccoon cards for other people's cards.
Thanks, I needed that one.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
And it's kind of only when you go against human nature that your design breaks. And so I wasn't an expert at trading cards, but we had made trading cards, and immediately we saw the trading card behavior. I'm like, hey, that's powerful. I didn't know that was going to happen, but I guess I probably should have. I'm sure Mike Soliker was laughing at me, saying, well, of course they were going to.
They're trading cards.
They're trading cards. You trade them. Yeah, human beings will surprise you, or rather, I kind of surprise myself at getting things wrong, and trying to learn from them. So, I don't know if I answered your question well, but that's just kind of.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
So mine's an easy question. I just started in game development like 2 years ago. Before I was doing, for 15 years, just database programming.
Mm-hmm.
And that was mostly just indoors, didn't interact, and now I'm in a more social environment. As an introvert programmer, what would you recommend to more socialize with others, be open, more minded? Sometimes I get good game design ideas, but sometimes I just get, how would you do that? Programming wise, it wouldn't work. How can I communicate to my team or certain people that I want to work with, as a coder, explain to them, maybe this can work, or, we can't do everything in programming sometimes.
Well, the best way to learn how to make games is to make games. And game design is very much about communication. Tim Schafer said something a while back, which I really... also, Paul McCartney told me never to drop names. But But Tim Schafer said that a film script is an invitation to collaborate, and I think the same is true of game design. So I think the primary goal of the game designer is like, sure, you can come up with the game mechanic and the overall story, but if you can't communicate it to your team, your game's probably not going to go over well. So I think the best game designers out there are those who are the best communicators. From the technical point of view, because I also came from the technical side, is when I started programming, I was very much a kid who had taught himself to program on an Atari. And when I decided that I was going to be a professional programmer, I started taking a whole bunch of programming classes. Even programming classes that turned out to be useless, like 8086 Assembler. But in that class, I programmed a Space Invaders game as my final project because I wanted to learn how those crazy guys back on the Atari 2600 did it. It's a technical art, it's a commercial art, and the best artists always understand their tools better than other artists. So, Leonardo da Vinci knew darn well when he was mixing his paints what those paints were going to do. He knew what brushes to use to get his ideas across. The same is the case in digital interactive artists. Those who understand the computer best are going to be able to come up with ideas that are executable and really good. So it is a combination of understanding what computers do and what computers don't do, which it seems like you have, but learning what is your best style for transferring that communication to the other members of your team. So for me, I write really long documents because, as you probably noticed from this talk, I tend to ramble. So it's better if I talk it or if I write it down. That way I make sure everybody gets all the details that I'm looking for. Other people are more verbal. Everybody has their own style. So I would just say it's all about communication, making sure that you are getting across to your collaborators what it is that you're looking for so that they can add to it and plus it up.
Thanks.
All right, last question. Anyone?
Well, this is I haven't been to Galaxy's Edge, but I just read an article actually at the LA Times about the new part of the theme park, and I just wanted to hear your take about it. I mean, what?
I think it's fantastic. It's really astonishing what they've done in bringing a Star Wars world to life. I mean, there's a Millennium Falcon, for heaven's sakes. There's a Dianoga hanging out by the water fountain. There's a cantina where you can get really bizarre drinks that smoke and stormtroopers walking through the land. You should go see it. It's really cool.
And the other one is, what's your take about the AR? I mean, augmented reality in phones. If you guys have something, or I mean, talking about people within the theme park.
I can't talk about any project's future or otherwise, but I can talk about my own personal opinion, which is, I think that AR in a location-based setting offers a lot of opportunities in the future. You just have to find the right story and the right setting for it.
Thank you. Sounds like there's a desire.
Sounds like there are people in the audience who have good ideas for AR and location-based entertainment.
If you need someone in AR programming,
All right. Well, thank you very much. Let's have a big hand for Jonathan.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Scott.